So today's webinar is titled, How Healthy is Your Fundraising Program? 5 temperature checks to find out. Our presenters are Wendy Hatch and Mary Hackett. Wendy has been a vice president with the Alford Group for the past 17 years. She provides consulting in organizational development, strategic planning, governance, and all aspects of fundraising. She has over 35 years of experience in the public and not-for-profit sectors as a program manager, fund development officer, executive director, and consultant. She's an active member of Washington State's AFP chapter, Advancement Northwest, having just served 4 years on the chapter's board. And Mary Hackett is also an associate vice president with the Alford Group, where she leads Alford Analytics, our data analytics line of service. Mary provides deep insight into donors, trends, and gaps in giving that inform organizational decision-making. In her many years of experience fundraising for nonprofit organizations, she's honed her database and analytical skills to drive strategic and impactful outcomes for acquiring, retaining, and upgrading donors at all levels of giving. So again, thank you for being here, and now I'm happy to turn it over to Wendy and Mary.
Thanks, Sharon. Hi, everybody. This is Wendy Hatch. Mary and I are really excited to be with you today. A couple of quick things before we get started. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will have that recording available for you after the event, along with the slides that we're going to be presenting. Please look for an email later today with both of these things, along with the link that Sharon mentioned to sign up for our next webinars. You'll also get a takeaway tool from our session today. Mary will describe that a little bit later. Everyone joining us is in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. We will have time, however, at the end of our presentation to take questions. If you have a question, simply click on the Q&A icon in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. That will open a window where you can type in your questions. Only the presenters will be able to see the questions, not the audience. We'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A at the end. Lastly, I invite you to join us on Twitter throughout the webinar using the hashtag NCOStrength. We will be live tweeting and hope to have you join us as well. Today we're going to be talking about temperature checks. And frankly, the topic is pretty timely right now, given that most of the country is really in a heat wave. Last Friday, an analysis by the Associated Press showed that every state in the lower 8 hit at least 90 degrees somewhere within its borders, except one, Washington, where Mary and I are. So our sympathies go out to the rest of you who are struggling with this heat and humidity. During our hour together, we're going to underscore the importance of knowing where you are so that you can plan where you want to go. And in fundraising, we know that means understanding the results, the data, and the trends of our current fundraising programs so that we can better plan for our future. We will point out just 10 of the dozens of data points that can be studied, and then we're going to drill down a little deeper into 5 of them. We'll then conclude for questions. So let's get started. How would you characterize your fundraising program? Is it bright and sunny? Your program is robust, it's diverse, and it's growing. Your long-range forecast looks quite promising. Or does your program have a few clouds hanging around? Your revenue and your donor pool have stayed pretty much the same. Things feel somewhat stagnant. You're beginning to feel a change in the weather, and not for the good. Or is some wind and rain heading your way? Your revenue and donor numbers are declining, and historical funding sources are drying up. You know you better make some changes quickly, or a full-fledged storm is going to hit. Or do you even know your temperature? Do you have the information you need to assess the temperature of your program? How would you change how you spent your time, your energy, your budget if you knew some of the following? Only 4 donors gave just over 50% of the total revenue last year. Your donor pool is declining 15% in just the last 3 years. You're only retaining 22% of your new donors, and just shy of 80% of your entire donor base gives $250 or less. These are pretty alarming statistics, but they're telling you something really important that you need to know to plan your future. You're too reliant on a very few donors. Now, you certainly don't want to do anything to jeopardize these 4 donors, but you need to engage and upgrade the rest of them who are giving over half of your annual revenue. Your donor pool is shrinking, and you need to plan strategies to keep from losing so many donors through attrition, and you need to figure out how to convert those new donors into ongoing supporters. And you know that you don't have much of a pipeline. You need strategies to upgrade those donors at the $250 level so that you can feed the pipeline for increased and annual major gifts. On the other hand, what would you do differently if you knew this information? Corporate giving increased by 12 donors and $165,000 last year. 5 family foundations increased their giving every year for 4 consecutive years. And over the last 3 years, the median gift from recovered donors increased from 180 to 231. They stepped away from you for a while, and when they came back, they were giving even more. While you don't ever want to rest on your laurels, these figures are great. They're telling you what you're doing right, what is working, what to continue, and what to build on. But either way, we need to know where we are so we can plan where to go. And in fundraising, how do we know where we are? We analyze our results, we analyze our data and our trends. Simply defined, data analytics is the discovery and the interpretation of meaningful data patterns that is then used to predict future donor behavior. And successful development operations do just that. They analyze and understand their donors' giving behavior. They look at what inspires their donors to give, when they like to give, how often they like to give, what time of the year. They honestly evaluate what is working and what is not. They study how their donor pool is changing. Is it growing or shrinking, getting older or younger? Is it quite diverse or very heavy in one constituency? They measure return on investment to make sure they're spending their budget wisely and getting the best bang for their buck. And last, but certainly not least, they don't automatically say, this is how we've always done it. This has always worked for us. All of this information about where we are now is then used to plan, revitalize, tweak, or even restructure future fundraising programs, where we are going. We want to create plans that are data-driven. Those of us who've been in the field for a long time did our best to extract and analyze data and use the results to make reasoned decisions for future fundraising efforts. But it wasn't always easy to get much beyond the most basic information. Fundraising was a lot more art than science back then. Now the power of databases and the sophistication of analytics have grown beyond what we could have imagined in the 80s and 90s. We can now look at our data, really look at it, and slice it and dice it in ways we couldn't even dream of before. For-profits have been using data analytics to drive their business decisions for years. And fortunately, many of the words that you see in this slide are now part of our lexicon in fundraising. And employing data analytics, either in-house or through outside vendors, is possible and affordable for shops of all sizes today. Studying information about the various aspects of your development program can clearly demonstrate what is working well and what isn't, where the gaps in giving are, and more importantly, where opportunities exist, what constituency we should put more emphasis on, or what donors at what levels are inclined to increase their giving, and so on. On this side, you can see some, but not all, of the various data points that can be extracted from your database, data that can show trends in your program. You can study total donors or total revenue, or revenue by the various solicitation channels. You can look at your revenue mix. You can look at who you're acquiring, the new donors. You can look at retention of your existing donors. You can look at attrition and who you're losing. You can look at your recovered or recaptured donors, or your gift distribution. And it goes on and on. There's so many points that we can study. Fortunately, today's fundraising databases allow us to study these basic aspects of our fundraising program. But ideally, you want to evaluate many data points in relationship to others and over many fiscal years. For example, how many years are new donors staying engaged with your organization with increasingly higher gifts, and how long does it take them to move into your major gift category? That is when pulling your data and illustrating trends can become very complex quickly. So this slide looks pretty crazy, maybe even a little intimidating, doesn't it? You probably can't even read it, and you're not meant to. It's just illustrating how many variables there are in fundraising that can be evaluated and measured in relationship to each other. And well-structured data analytics can put order to this craziness and help you dissect your giving trends, positive and negative, in order to make strategic, data-driven decisions about your future. However, we have less than an hour today, so we're going to look at the health, taking the temperature, if you will, of just 5 of the possible aspects of your fundraising program. We selected 5 that are foundational in any fundraising program and should be easily obtained from the software that you have. Mary is going to help you to take a temperature check of your overall data-based health, your retention rate of new and existing donors, recaptured donors, your constituency mix, and your gift distribution pipeline. Of course, we all hope that our overall temperature is bright and sunny. But remember, clouds can disappear and storms can pass. So if you have some clouds on your horizon, don't despair. Mary's going to provide some tangible ideas to turn your numbers in the right direction. Mary?
Thanks, Wendy. So we're going to start today with this circle in the center, which is your overall data health. And the reason it's in the center, and we're going to start with it today, is because it's the data that lives in your database really feeds all of your reporting metrics and any analytics that you're going to pull. So we will go ahead and start with overall data health. And here at the Alford Group, what we like to do when we're looking at databases is look at these 4 large categories of health and integrity. So first is your overall health. You know, how many duplicate or triplicate records do you have in your database? Is your database filled with bad addresses? Can you not communicate with your donors or send them mail? Or maybe constituents who have never made a gift. Your donor database, it shouldn't be the phone book. It should be chock full of constituents who are close to giving or are giving. Next, we take a look at the protocol and the standards around gift entry and pledge management. Do you have some rigor built into what goes into your database and the coding structure that you use? Next is constituent management and tracking. So when constituents have relationships with each other, do you connect them within your database? Because your database is a living, breathing, relational tool for you. When a donor lets you know their communication preferences, are you capturing that so you can show good stewardship to that donor? And lastly, utilization of the database. Are you using the modules that you're paying for, and are you using them well? And does everyone have access to 2 different modules within the database to do their job well? So these are 4 large categories of health, and we have dozens and dozens of best practices within each of these 4 categories. But what we'd like to do is share some really big best practices for overall data health. So the first is that less than 3% of all your records should be duplicative. Dupes wreak havoc on all of your reporting efforts. So what I would suggest you do is pull a list of suspects, duplicates, or triplicates, and get your team together and just start going through the list. And it's a block and tackle effort, but a worthy one. Next is that more than one person should have supervisor rights to the database. So I don't like to say, you know, if somebody's hit by a bus. So I'd rather say, let's say that your database administrator won the lottery. And of course, left to go be an amazing philanthropist. But is there a second person that can get into your database and make the necessary changes to keep the integrity intact? So it's best practice to have at least 2 super users in your shop. The next is pledge payment schedules are recorded and pledge reminders are sent. So oftentimes when pledges are entered, there's no corresponding schedule. So that schedule triggers your reminders. So oftentimes, you know, we see big write-offs and things like that. So when you're entering pledges, make sure you have a payment schedule that corresponds. Next is your data entry default. And these are it's an amazing, robust tool within most of the databases. These defaults save time, they minimize error. You know, we're all human. And if you have more than one person that's entering gifts, it will ensure that they're all entered in the same way. Less than 8% of your constituency should have invalid addresses. So 10 to 15% of Americans move every year. So if you think about your database and think about when the last time you did an address append was, your shoulders might be inching closer to your ears. But rest assured, the appends are very inexpensive, they're very affordable, and it will really take care of all the bad addresses that are in your system in one full swoop. So it's a great investment. And then lastly, and I know this is somewhat provocative, but everyone should have access to the data and the reports they need to do their work. Your database should not be Fort Knox. It should be utilized. So if you want to put standards and rigor around what goes into the database, that is great. But when it comes to people when they pull data out of the database, you know, make sure they have, you know, your fundraisers are equipped to get the necessary information, whether it's prospecting or just looking at some results and looking for trends. There shouldn't be too many hoops to jump for. You know, they need that information to do their job. So those are some overall best practices for your data health. And although there are dozens more, and we'd love to hear your top tips and tricks. So if you want to give us a shout out on Twitter, you can use the hashtag NPOStrength. So our next big temperature check is retention rate. And I love this metric. I love it because every donor counts. You know, if you have a donor that gives $1 and you have a donor that gives $1 million, they have the same quote unquote weight when it comes to crunching your retention numbers. So your retention rate also, it speaks to many facets of your overall organization and how they work, how you all work together, because it really takes a village to have a healthy fundraising program. So retained donors, they understand your work and they're passionate about it. And this is where your program experts and your, you know, C-level executives come in and can help you articulate to your donors how their gift has made an impact. You know, retained donors, they feel thanked and appreciated. So this is your stewardship and your development department. They're letting donors know that their gift made an impact and how their gift has changed lives or saved lives. They're communicated with. So your marketing and your communications department are including philanthropic messages in their overall messaging. And of course, they're asked. So this is your development department, hitting the pavement and sending out those solicitations. So how you calculate your retention rate is you take the number of returning donors and you divide it by the number of your total number of donors from the previous year, and that is going to give you your retention rate. So depending on the source, and there are many sources out there that have looked at an overall national average of retention, but all of them are between 43 and 45%. So this is actually, it's a systemic issue here in the nonprofit sector, is the retention rate. So when you calculate yours and let's say you land at 46%. Please don't let that encourage complacency. Know that the national average is a problem, and it's really not to aspire to. We want to surpass that. As a collective nonprofit body, we need to increase the retention rate. But as you calculate yours, first of all, if your retention rate is over 65%, you should stop and celebrate. Oftentimes, we tick the box and move on to the next task. But celebrate, because that means that your stewardship efforts are working, and all of the things we looked at in the previous slide, your donors they're being asked, they're being thanked, they're getting those messages, they're hearing from your program experts. So just enjoy that. But you might consider an acquisition strategy. So you know that your systems are in place. You're tracking your donors, you're sending them acknowledgments, you're doing all the right things. And if at a high retention rate, you might consider growing your donor pool at this point. Now, it can be a little cloudy if your retention rate is between 40 and 64%. So there's work to be done. Of course, you're aligned with the national average, but we would recommend at the Alford Group that you start or launch or hone a really smart donor-centered stewardship strategy. So sending a timely acknowledgement, communicating that a donor's gift has been received and is utilized. Let them know when their gift has been deployed and is actually making an impact. These are areas that help you retain your donors. And I'm borrowing this from a brilliant colleague at the Alford Group. I hope she doesn't mind. But I recently heard a colleague say that as nonprofits, we're so good at telling donors why they should support us. And we often take a lot of the airtime explaining why we deserve their support. But we oftentimes don't take the time to ask our donors why they think we deserve our support, which really helps open up like a two-way dialogue. So I would really encourage you to create some of those innovative opportunities. So if your retention rate, when you calculate it, is below 39%, here are some of our favorite ways to steward donors, and stewardship is the name of the game. First, make sure your acknowledgments are going out within 3 to 4 days. Look at your language. Look at every single word in that letter. If this is the only piece that your donors receive, is it the most impactful language? Have you promoted an upcoming event where a donor might make a second gift or engage in a new way? Do you have a compelling story that a donor will remember and maybe tell a friend at dinner? And have you offered, a tour of the facility? Or, make sure your letter is personalized. It should have their name on it. Secondly, when you get to work in the morning, get your coffee and sit at your desk. Or if you're in Seattle with Wendy, like Wendy and I are, you have your third Starbucks and sit at the desk. And the first thing you should do is pick 3 recent donors and call them to thank them for their gift. We promise it will be one of the most rewarding things you do that day. These are day maker calls. And those donors will remember when you go back to solicit them for a second gift, they're going to remember that conversation and they're going to remember that voicemail. And if you make 2 or 3 calls every day, you're going to call close to 1,000 constituents over 1 year. Your retention rate is sure to increase. And then lastly is to create some really innovative cultivation and stewardship experiences that are going to get your donors on site regularly. So it shouldn't be a solicitation. It's really a time to connect your donors to the mission. So maybe on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, you could mix it up by having different presentations from program experts or your C-level executives. It could be, donuts with a director or, coffee with Chris, the executive director. But this way donors can opt in, and when they opt in to attend these things, they're self-identifying as prospects that should be stewarded. So those are some really tangible takeaways on how to look at your health of the retention rate and then to, proactively, react to it. So we're going to turn our sights to our third temperature check. and that is recovering donors. So when you look at your donor pool for the last year, all donors are going to fit into one of these three categories. They're either going to be first-time donors. They've never made a gift to your organization before. They're going to be retained from the previous year. They are on the path with you. Or they're going to be recovered. They've been long lapsed. They've gone off the beaten path, but they've come back. So what we did is we looked at the last 30 data sets that we've done for clients here at the Alford Group and took the collective average. And this is what the Alford Group client pie looks like. So you can see that the majority of donors are retained and recovered, and about 1 out of every 5 is new. So oftentimes, organizations make the decision to spend significant funds and efforts on acquiring new donors as opposed to kind of bringing back some of those lapsed. So when we layer on, for the last 30 data sets, we layer on the median gift for those groups. You can say it makes sound business, or it's a sound business decision to spend time on your retained and your recovered. We love our new donors. They come in at a median gift of $68, but your long lapse give almost double that at $129. And then of course your retained donors, this is where it's at, $231. So we would encourage you to query your database and look at what your pie looks like and overlay the median gift. And that really helps you figure out where to spend your time and where to spend your money and what is going to be the highest and best bang for your buck. Now, when you pull that data, here are some temperature checks. So if 50% of your donors are new every year, and you can look at multiple years going back, then there's a retention challenge. But on the bright side, after every storm is a rainbow. You're probably sitting on a mountain of lapsed donors. So instead of this never-ending churn of new donors, we would encourage you to test some strategies on bringing back some of those donors that gave once and left. So if your median gift amount, if new donors are giving more than your retained or your recovered, then there's a stewardship issue. So you'll really want to look at your messages. Do they only talk about the problem and not what your organization is doing to solve it? Do your messages feel rushed or desperate for funding as opposed to inspiring donors to really invest in your work? And of course, it's a beautiful sunny day, like here in Seattle, when you have a really nice, diverse donor pool, and then there's a significant differentiation between those different median gift amounts. So those are some ways you can look at your pie to see what your mix is and see what your lapsed donors are doing. And we would definitely encourage, because we absolutely find that they tend to give more than your new donors. So we'll turn our sights now to our fourth temperature check, and it is a diverse revenue mix. So diversity is the name of the game. It is the key to healthy fundraising. And it's really important that you have revenue coming in from multiple sources. It's kind of like a stool. If one leg gets taken away or one source of revenue, you want the stool to stay standing. So you probably know that every year, Giving USA Foundation, in partnership with the Lilly Stanley School of Philanthropy, releases their State of Philanthropy. It's the longest running annual report in the U.S. for charitable giving and is the most comprehensive document available for any kind of analysis in our field of work. This is the most recent analysis of philanthropy by source, and you can see it continues to grow an amazing $373 billion last year. But you'll see a couple things. First is that it's a diverse pie. There are actual pieces where significant revenue is coming from different sources. And you can see that individuals, are gifting the majority, almost, 3/4 of all the revenue that's going to nonprofits. Now, it's not it's not imperative that your organization's revenue mix match this. It's really just important that your organization has diversity in the mix. So your pie might look different based on your organization type, and that's okay. But the reason that it's an important temperature check is, one, it's gonna show you where you have risk. It's also going to help you assess your staffing structure. Does your staffing structure match the dollars that are coming in the door? And of course, it helps with the budgeting process. So here are a couple examples of a revenue mix. So it's pretty cloudy when you only have really two significant pie pieces. You really want to make sure you have a diverse group of donors. And this organization is really interesting because 89% excuse me, is coming from foundations, and we know those dollars are shrinking every year. So if your pie looks similar to this, we would encourage you to really think about your individual giving strategies, your annual giving program, and your major giving program. And then maybe, look at some corporations or different, government funding that will really help diversify your strategy and your revenue mix. Now, here is a happy, healthy pie that has, 4 distinct revenue sources, and significant funds are coming through each of those. So we would encourage you to look at your revenue mix and even maybe look at it going back 3 years. How has it changed, and what's growing and what's not? And that allows you to really make strong decisions when it comes to spending, your limited budget dollars. So that's our 4th temperature check. We're going to turn our sights now to donor distribution and pipeline, which is our 5th and final temperature check. So another indicator of health is a solid donor distribution. And sometimes this is referred to as a donor pyramid because of its intended shape. You can see here, as the gift amount goes up, at $10,000 or more, you have less donors. But as the number of donors grows, you're definitely going to have more donors at the lower level. So if you query your database and you look at each donor's cumulative giving in the last fiscal year, you can actually plot out how many donors are at which level. And we would encourage you to really, really visually map it out, because it's really hard to look at when you're just looking at a grid or an Excel spreadsheet. So here's an example of a very healthy donor distribution. So you can see it almost looks like a pyramid. It's very stable in shape. And what we're looking at here on the y-axis is the giving, the cumulative giving amount. So these 23 donors last fiscal year gave between 5 and 9.9 thousand. Then you have the number of donors on the x-axis. So this is a very stable pyramid. There are a few things. I'd love to see a few more donors here at the $2,500 mark. And I'd love to see a few more donors at the $500 to $999. And we often, at the Alford Group, we often see that organizations struggle at those giving levels. But what's great about this donor distribution is it shows a strong pipeline. This organization has 152 donors that are giving between 250 and 500. So as the higher levels are growing with the organization and stretching their giving, they have a nice pool of donors to go after as they're working to graduate other donors up through the pipeline. So here is an example of a cloudy, not so stable donor distribution. So you can see they have heavy hitters at the top, which is great. We love that. And they're essentially, they have a grand slam at the $10,000 mark. They're doing a wonderful job. But then the next 2 levels down, they don't have the pipeline that they need to sustain the $10,000 to $25,000 mark. So growing this would substantially make their pipeline much better. And the same goes for the $1,000 to $2,500 mark. They're doing a wonderful job of getting donors at that level. But when these 59 continue to graduate up, they don't have the adequate pool to continue growing that level. So one interesting thing that you might consider doing is mapping out your donor distribution. And with an overlay, it's mapping out what you would like it to look like. And then literally prospecting and thinking about your tactics about how to grow very specific levels of giving. So those are our 5 large temperature checks. And just to recap, there are hundreds of ways to slice and dice data to really help you make informed, proactive decisions. The 5 we covered today, of course, overall data health, looking at your donor distribution, really looking at your revenue mix for diversity, checking your retention rate. It's almost like it's literally a temperature check for your organization's fundraising program. And of course, looking at how your long-lapsed donors are recovering or are engaging with you. So those are our top 5. We've actually had several questions come in, throughout the webinar. So we'd like to go through those questions. Before we do, I'm just going to go back one slide. When you get your email from the Alford Group today, of course, there'll be the recording of this webinar. There's also going to be a really handy tool for you. And when it comes, it's going to look like this, but it's going to be blown out a little more. Print it out and put it on your bulletin board. And the reason we say to do that is because we know that when you make data-driven decisions, you raise more money. And having this in front of you every day is going to help you think about, what's the most data-driven decision I can make, and how is that going to help empower my staff or my board or my donors to engage in the mission. So you'll get that today, and it's a very handy, it asks some kind of provocative questions around each of these areas. So you will see that come through on your email today. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at some of the questions that have come in through our webinar. Okay, so the first question is, I'm interested in running analytics, but need to do some cleanup in my database. What are the first few things I should do to begin the process? Okay, so I know that the idea of cleaning up a database can be daunting. And I know I have cleaned up many databases, but databases have come so far. Many of them have utilities built right in the database, so you can make these large sweeping changes and change multiple codes and multiple records in one swoop. So I would strongly encourage you to use all those tools that come with your database. And I think it's a really good question. I think the first big cleanup effort, one, I would fix the duplicative records, because it just hinders reporting and it clogs up your database, and they're just hard to deal with. So I would definitely clean that up. The second would be to, consider a national change of address update. I think it costs between, $500 and $1,000, but it's a small price to pay to fix all those bad addresses. And third, I would make sure that, your coding structure makes sense for your organization. And that's a biggie. That could literally be its own webinar. But, look at how donors are coded. Does it make sense? Is it intuitive? Can people find the donors that they're looking for when they're writing reports and queries? So those are some biggies. I can maybe do some more on Twitter, and we'd love to hear yours as well. Use that hashtag NPO Strength, and you can always ask database questions, cleanup questions for us, analytic questions. And we'd love to hear your best tips and tricks for data cleanup.
Another great question that we got is, in addition to using the information to drive our fundraising program, are there other ways it can be useful in our overall program? This is such a great question because having data at your fingertips can really benefit a lot of different aspects of your operations. The first one that comes to mind for me is to use it to help educate your boss or your board of directors about a variety of things. And perhaps they're advocating for a very aggressive increase in your fundraising budget for next year than you're comfortable with. The predictive modeling that you can derive from solid analytics can really help everyone be realistic about the future growth. It also goes the other way. If you have a very conservative boss or board and you can show that the trends are really on a wonderful trajectory, you can encourage a more optimistic budget for the coming year. You know, another example is if your board, your boss is encouraging you to increase efforts with a particular constituency. You know, I know we all hear, why don't you go to more corporations? Why don't you get more corporate support? You know, and we just saw from the Giving USA statistics that only 5% of all philanthropic monies come from corporations. So having that statistic at your fingertips and the slide or information from Giving USA and compare it to your own, you can really indicate why you would be advocating for, you know, a greater efforts in some of the other pieces of the pie. Also, concrete data can really help you rally resources for your program. If you can really show what's working, then you can encourage a greater budget for you to do more of it. If you can show what's not working, you can also rally resources to help study why or to explore new or different opportunities. And then the last one that comes to my mind is having information about your fundraising program can help you better target where you allocate your staffing resources. And it can help you maybe advocate for greater resources, but at the very least, it can show you where you should be pointing most of your staffing resources to. Can you think of some others, Mary?
Yeah, I'd like to just expand a little bit about, you know, educating your boss or your board. So, you know, when we do Alford analytics for organizations all over the country, we usually present, you know, an abridged version to the board, and frankly, the results are quite amazing because one, it's a calibration tool. So if you're going to run analytics, I would absolutely encourage you to share some of those with your board. So not only will they feel informed, but they can figure out how to plug in. Like, oh, we need to grow our individual donors, you know, maybe I need to have a second table at this upcoming event. So it allows them to really understand and have a solid foundation of how they can plug in. You know, I just actually presented a Alford Analytics yesterday morning and to a board, and a woman actually cried, Wendy, she cried, because we were talking about an event that she has chaired for 7 years, and she was going to resign. And when we talked about how donors come in through that event, how long they stay, how many graduate up to the major gift level, and how that first experience really sent those donors on a trajectory with the organization, she said, I'm going to do it for 7 more years. Because she just didn't, nobody had really articulated or could really get that data, you know, pulled and crunched to articulate to her how all those, yes, it's frustrating evenings when you're doing an event and, you know, RSVPs coming at the last moment, but in this woman's eyes, she felt validated, and all that stress was worth it when she found out those donors, you know, stayed with the organization for 5 more years, and you know, 53% were being retained at the event next year. So it's a really powerful tool for your board. So I would really encourage you to share it with your development committee or your board.
Mary, there's a great question here. Any advice or benchmarks you can share on how much time or how much money we should spend on our data analytics?
Well, So it's very easy to get into analysis paralysis. And that's why we really only wanted to, go over 5 today. At the Alford Group, we have software that will take your donor data and crunch it and give you a 360-degree view of what's happening. If you were going to crunch, or if I was going to crunch all those numbers, it would probably take me about 2 weeks to do it. I wouldn't encourage you to stop work and do it for 2 weeks, but I would encourage you to figure out what your top metrics would be and look at those. And I would say, for solid analytics, I would, because it helps you make such data-driven decisions. I mean, it's literally surgical. Like, here are all your issues. Here's advice on how to change these specific issues. I would spend between $4,000 and $6,000, and I think that that will really give you a solid foundation on how to proactively grow your program or fix any issues that you might be having.
We have just maybe one last question that's pretty easy. Where can I get the entire Giving USA report? It's such a great tool to have in your toolbox. And you can easily download information from givingusa.org. They have a great summary infographic, and it's kind of a bulletin board worthy piece of information to have handy. And you can also download a highlight or an executive summary, if you will, for free. And then you can purchase a complete PowerPoint or a full written report or a digital report, as well as additional data tables for different aspects of fundraising that goes back for many, many years. So again, it's givingusa.org. I think at this point, we will turn it back to Sharon.
Yes, so go forth and make data-driven decisions. And thank you so much for your time. Sharon, we'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mary and Wendy. What a great presentation and discussion and terrific questions. Thank you, everyone. I just want to make one note that for the Giving USA materials that you can purchase, in the follow-up email that you'll get, we'll make a note of a discount code that you can utilize through the Alford Group to give you a purchase discount when you decide which of the report elements you'd like to use. Where the Alford Group is pleased to be a founding member of the Giving Institute, which is the organization that funds that project through the Lilly School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. So again, Mary and Wendy, great presentation. The healthiest fundraising programs are the ones that leverage insights that can be gleaned from your donor data. Where there's a donor database, there are donor insights to be used. So these 5 temperature checks are really just a start to what you can do to better assess and understand your donors' giving behavior. That understanding will allow you to create data-driven and effective strategies. And we all know how important and how meaningful it is to see growth in our fundraising work and our organizational development and creating a culture of philanthropy that will thrive. Alford Analytics can help you do this. We can help you with everything from simple database diagnostics to in-depth donor data assessments. So please contact us using the phone numbers listed here if you'd like to speak with someone about the services that we provide. So looking ahead at the series, if you'll advance to the final slide, this is the second of our webinar series. We're excited for the next one on August the 11th. Certainly a topic that's of importance to all of us, getting the most from your board. You can register for these free webinars simply by going to the Alford Group's webpage. You'll see also in the email later today a link to register and also a link to the recording of today's presentation, the full slide deck, and as Mary had alluded to, a fundraising analytics checklist. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us. This concludes today's webinar, and we're going to disconnect now, but hope to connect with you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.